I'm back to my same old ways. I swear I try to change. You just feel so right when I do wrong. So right along.
Well, here we are. It's episode 9.
Woohoo!
Harder Than Healing. I'm still Jason Lemire. I'm still the playwright.
I am Nathaniel Ellison, clinician.
And I am still Don Malloy, the Green Beret.
We have a very special episode today. We are incredibly grateful for our listeners and our viewers on all the platforms. And we have opened up the lines today. We are fielding questions from our audience. Questions, comments, observations. We've got some really good ones. And so I just want to get into it.
All right, I'm excited.
This first one comes from...
Terrified.
Yes, and no warning. They've gotten no warning.
Yeah. It's totally set up.
Yeah, this first one comes from Frank Valdez.
What you know about Frankie?
Yeah. Frankie's seen some things. Frankie's been around. Frankie, who is brilliant, by the way, and a wonderful human being. Shout out, Frankie. Everyone has experienced trauma. We all respond differently. It's difficult to empathize with another's trauma until we explore our own. So already we love the setup, Frank. Here comes the question. Trauma can drive achievement. Trauma can drive addiction. Is achievement morally superior to addiction?
Go.
Define
achievement.
Define addiction. Right. So, I think we have this construct of like addiction as to a substance or addiction to being in the mountains all the time. Right. Addiction to, some sort of unsavory sociological thing, or an addiction to making sure that you're taking care of your kids, right? Like, I think that it depends on how you qualify them,
Well, let's do this.
Okay.
Let's, for the sake of, and I think my suspicion is that there are a lot of people out there nodding their heads and agreeing with you. I wonder what happens if we limit this just a little bit, and we define.
I'm not very good at that.
we define addiction in that sort of narrow, whether you're talking about substances or you're talking about a particular behavior, right? Mm-hmm. And then we define achievement as within the constructs of our pseudo-capitalist society, in which we're out here picking winners and losers every day.
So is achievement morally superior to addiction?
Mm-hmm.
You can give it a run?
So I'm going to say right off the bat, like I would say that most people would say that it's going to be, right? But that would be that like clear and fast, hard cut answer.
Right.
But going back to the first part of what you were saying is, we're identifying here that he's saying that trauma affects everybody and everybody has their own kind of way of dealing with it, correct?
Everyone has experienced trauma. We all respond differently.
So, and I would say that's super accurate and also kind of misleading, right? Because if you look at trauma, my favorite thing to say, trauma is trauma is trauma is trauma. Because everybody is going to have a nervous response in their system. Something in their system is going to go offline, right? So that's going to happen to everybody with trauma. Now, whatever that is going to be different for everybody. But some people are going to have a startle response. Some people are going to have numbness. Some people are going to have, because of the numbness, maybe then the maladaptive coping skills, going to drinking or some sort of substance use. But I would go back to it. It's almost all going to play out the same in everybody because the nervous system does not want to accept that trauma. And so it goes offline. That is stereotypical.
what was the piece about you can't empathize with?
Yeah,
Until-
I had to sort of go through this because Frank packed a lot of quality into this message. That bit is, it's difficult to empathize with another's trauma until we explore our own. And Donald, I wonder if this speaks a little bit to what you're saying, because when we explore our own trauma, a lot of empathy is rooted in recognition.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's this shared experience of suffering, right? Whether it's, I think trauma puts it into a really narrow, kind of more defined space. And I think that if we expand that and it includes suffering in general, then I think that it opens up the opportunity to be able to empathize with people across the board. Which I think, ironically enough, is part of what it is that we've been trying to do on this whole gig, is that it may be trauma in one experience and it may be suffering in another experience. It may be loss. It may be, whatever that grief looks like, but a person may not necessarily label it as trauma.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I would say, and we've been having this conversation for years, but one of the things that I pose is that, like, your trauma story is the only thing that you need to survive, because in that trauma, you're going to learn more about yourself, especially if you dig into it. And so one of the conversations Nathaniel and I have been having for years is, if you are able to go into that trauma or that experience, you become a better clinician, right? And so a lot of the work
for sure
that Tiffany and I do in the clinic is about embodying that, right? Like, I'm not trying to run away from my trauma. I'm going to be as authentic in the room as I ask my client to be, as I ask my veteran to be. I'm going to ask them to be authentic because I am also authentic.
Right.
And because I have had these lived experiences, that makes me a better counselor. And I am also very much able to empathize then.
So it's interesting also because we had this email came from, and by the way, shout out to everybody who used pod, P-O-D, at hearterthanhealing.com. This one came in through the Harder Than Healing email inbox from Killian S. Killian, we don't know you. We love you. Thank you for listening. Killian writes, I heard a quote once that addiction is neither a choice nor a disease. It's an attempt to solve a problem.
I don't know about solve. It's an attempt to address a problem.
Cope with?
Cope with, yeah. Because solve to me has got the piece of, like, there's some sort of resolution on the backside of it. Addiction doesn't necessarily solve a problem as much as it might mask it or make it easier for you to deal with said problem.
Well, but that might be the reality, but it I guess that one resonated with me just because the idea of solving something means, oh, it's done. I don't have to deal with it anymore. And so I do wonder, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not saying that the definition.
Solve a problem.
Here, look, I'll read it again. Addiction is neither a choice nor a disease. It's an attempt to solve a problem.
But I'm going to go back to the first part, right? Because it's not a choice. Well, if you're choosing to solve the problem, you're choosing which way to solve this problem.
Okay.
It's still a choice. As a matter of fact, I would say that addiction is a choice. No. I would say that use is a choice.
Okay.
The addiction part comes later. But if you choose to use because you're trying to either solve or cope with something, right? It starts off as like, hey, we're problem solving here. How can I feel better? But going back to the shared misery thing, like, if human beings were to just recognize sometimes we just are not supposed to feel good about whatever it is that's going on, right, then you just sit in it. So the choice would be, it sucks.
Right. And it's
and
okay.
And I also just have to be here.
Right. And that you don't have to necessarily solve it. Right. I mean, I think one of those pieces that we oftentimes move towards is, how do we have some sort of tangible solution for this thing, right? Like, if I could just do this, then it would be fixed, or this problem would be solved. And when this idea of, like, it's to solve a problem, for me, when I think of solving a problem, it's like, I have this particular length of wood and I'm going to build this particular cabinet, like how many shelves can I build? Like that's, to me, solving a problem. Like those, and it's a more simplistic thing clearly than any kind of interpersonal or relational stuff. However, for me, when I think of solving something, it's got more of an active, engaged bent to it.
Yeah. And I think there's oh, by the way, with the solving piece is if we're trying to solve something, then we have to like, it becomes tangible, right? It's something that you do. And I think a lot of times we want to solve something where there isn't a problem, right? It's more of a feeling. I feel this, and so now I need to solve a problem. And most of the time I think to myself, like, well, why is feeling ever a problem?
Well,
Right?
there is that.
And it's, the reality is that we're emotional. So it's interesting because I love telling my veterans this, because they're always like, no, I'm just going to stuff it down. No, it's cool. We can, I don't need to feel. I'm just going to be this hard person. I'm like, yeah. And there's this part of your brain, right, that without it, you're not a human being. So if you're living, breathing, you have that part of your brain is intact, right? And so you're going to have to deal with the emotion, because that's just a part of you as a human being. So why not just take advantage of it, use it, accept it, and now we're back to the area of like, yeah, so it's an emotion. Cool. Why do we need to solve that?
Well, so now this becomes interesting, because I wonder if one of the things that you're losing access to when you stuff it down, I wonder if part of what you're losing access to is what I'll call a moral spectrum.
Okay.
I wonder if, coming back to this question of, is achievement morally superior to addiction? I know from experience with people close to me that addiction can drive people to lie, to cheat, to steal.
Achievement can too.
Well, this is what becomes interesting, right? If you are pursuing, if you're looking to, if we're looking to fill holes, if we're looking to address pain, and as opposed to addressing it directly and sitting with it and maybe just sitting there and being like, man, this sucks, and I'm going to sit here and in the suck. That both the pursuit of achievement and the full giving of oneself to one's addictions or demons, both of them may have the result of cutting yourself off from a part of you.
Okay. So I love where you're going with this, because the way I tell my veterans is like, hey, look, trauma, again, analogy, you got this shelf, and with this shelf, you constantly have these boxes full of trauma. If you don't take those boxes off the shelf and sort through them and organize them, then you don't sit in the trauma long enough to recognize you in that trauma, right? You try and run from it. You become numb. If you take that box off and you sort it out, you put it back up on the shelf, magically these boxes just kind of go away. When you do that, you earn yourself back. So the achievement
like you're
is
in different boxes.
Yeah, 100%. And all your experiences without full clarity, you were there. They're your experiences. They make you who you are, but without full clarity about what that experience was like and you in it, we don't know who you are. You don't know who you are.
Right, without your emotional experience in that moment. And one of the things that, and I don't know if we've talked about that on here, but I know one of the things we talk about all the time is I'll have folks who will say, hey, typically men will come in and say, hey, I need help with anger management. And my response is always, I don't do anger management. Like, I don't want you to manage your anger. I don't want you, like, you own your anger, and let's put in all of the other possible experiences of feeling that you could have, because the idea of anger management is like, I'm not going to get angry. Well, why not? I mean, you should get angry, and you should also be happy and sad and frustrated and all of the things, and you should have a full gambit of emotional experiences. And anger management oftentimes is this experience of like, I'm supposed to like manage my upset.
All right, well, hang on a second, because we got, so GC, shout out GC, whoever you may be, writes, love the show. I feel like I'm learning right along with you guys. Excellent. Their question is, why does anger feel so good?
You want to go or you want me to go?
Yo, producer Tiffany just took an intake of breath.
I'm managing my anger.
Right?
Well done.
Why does
Wait,
anger
hang
feel
on a
so
second.
good?
Tiffany, what did that question mean to you? Why does anger feel so good?
Because it does. Yeah. And anger management is, the idea of being in anger management is a joke. I've been through anger management and it didn't work. I felt, in fact, it made me feel more angry. Because they were basically saying, don't be angry. Anger is an emotion. It's a legitimate emotion.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a visceral piece to it too. I was telling a story earlier about a hot tub friend of mine. And there's a release. There's kind of a catharsis that comes with the anger if it goes its full, duration, right? You can be angry and hold it and not do anything with it, not have any sort of a release, not have any kind of resolution around what it is that you're looking for with that. And I think that part of the reason that anger feels good is because when you do something with it, it's like, oh, okay, good. That was productive.
I feel like my nervous system is on fire when I'm angry. And for me, it's like, God, one of my clients said, hate fire. He's like, man, when I get that hate fire, I can be productive. And I'm like, oh, so hate fire equals productivity. He's like, yeah. So why wouldn't you want to be angry? And I'm like, oh, good point. And I did play a whole heck of a lot of sports growing up. And actually, I was probably the best when I wasn't angry. But man, if I was angry, you'd get a different level of play out of me.
I think our brain also is pretty good at like focusing our attention when we're angry. Because I know for me, and this typically will happen in a more academic setting, when someone says something ridiculous and my brain is like, I get very focused. Like I get very streamlined about whether it's my response, whether it's what I want to convey. And there's not a lot of fluff for me in those moments. I'm very much like, so it helps be concise, I think.
Well, and I think like in a military setting, anger is delicious. I don't know a better word for it.
Well, now hang on a
Well,
second though, because I
necessary,
have to assume though, right? My grandpa Edmund would always say, when you get emotional, you lose 90% of your intelligence. Which, say what you will about the exact accuracy of that percentage, but everyone in this room, including Malibu Keith, has done some dumb shit when they were angry and afterwards have been like, man, that was dumb. And, I guess I wonder, I can think of specific instances in military history where blunders have been made. Boondoggles. Because otherwise successful strategists got angry and did some dumb shit that lost them a battle or a campaign.
I think.
I want to remind everybody of FUBAR, by the way.
Yeah.
Fair.
Boondoggle. I'm going to go with FUBAR.
FUBAR sounds good. No, you're good. I think some of it is we do ridiculous things when we're angry. We do ridiculous things when we're happy. Right? You think about like that initial whatever as a kid, you're like, oh, I'm gonna go do this thing, and you're super excited about it, you're really jazzed, you're not angry, but you're super excited to have your first car, and you decide, I wonder if this actually goes 120 miles an hour, right? Like I think the emotional aspect of it is something we got to consider, but those things happen across the board, right? Like it's not just anger that houses
you're
poor
blowing
decisions,
my mind right now.
or it's not just whatever. And not to mention the fact that I'm ADHD all over the place. So impulsivity is a thing, whether I'm happy or sad or angry or whatever. So,
well, and the 100 miles an hour thing just kind of keeps coming up. But one of the things that I have recognized with my son, because he does have a temper, and he's like the sweetest kid on the planet.
He was pretty sweet.
And then he's got this temper. And I asked him the other day, well, not the other day, but probably like months ago, got super angry. And I was like, Donnie, you just don't get to do that stuff, right? Whatever it was, whether it's, you know, kicking a Lego or I don't know. And he was like, then what am I supposed to do? And I was like, you can tell me you're angry. Why don't you just let it out? Why don't you just tell me you're angry? And he tried it. And when he tried it, he was like, this isn't even fun. It's like, this isn't even fun anymore. Once I say it, it's like I'm done. And I was like, why are you done? He was like, because like I identified it. And once I did that, I was like, Dad, I'm angry. And he was like, and then all of a sudden it's like, this is boring. You know, and I was like, well, okay. And I was like, okay, so maybe sitting in the emotion, identifying and recognizing it, maybe that's actually using your brain. And then there's no anger management. You're just like, meh.
Right. And then you
angry.
deal with whatever issue that you were angry about.
Yeah.
Right. As opposed to stuffing it down and not dealing with it. And the next thing you know, it's skadoosh all over the place.
Skadoosh. I like the skadoosh.
Yeah, because I mean, I don't know. As a parent, I don't like being angry about some shit over here, right? And then I yell at my kids, or I yell at, I don't know, like some dumb shit, my students, myself. Whatever it may be. And it's like, that's I think the thing that's frustrating about anger, the thing that I find problematic about anger is the you know, when the innocent bystander gets it. And it's like, man, the collateral damage of anger is horrific.
Yeah. True. I mean, it's like road rage.
Well, I would say that's a huge part of what happens in the military from time to time. I think there are soldiers that have moral injury that were put in a place where they had to do some stuff that they probably didn't want to do. And maybe because of anger, and also maybe because they were just told to. But yeah, when anger gets the best of you and you do something silly, yeah, that's the stuff that you hold in a really dark place in your body and mind.
Well, then it goes to shame.
100%. Yeah.
Well, I think as we talk about it, though, the other thing that's interesting to me is, well, it's okay. He's just angry, right? Like, oh, it's fine, but he's just angry right now. Like, he'll be okay later. It's like, well, what do you mean it's okay? He's just angry. Like, you just yelled at 5 people for no apparent reason, and like you're screaming at your kid because he wants bubble gum. Like,
Right.
that's not okay.
Right.
Like, and you can be as angry as you want to, and you still have to regulate yourself.
So what I like this idea of, I can totally picture your son, Donald, just saying I'm angry and then being disappointed. Like, man, where'd the hate juice go? Like what? So what else? So let's say somebody's listening right now and they're thinking to themselves, man, I've been through 2 rounds of court-ordered anger management and it's some bullshit and it didn't help me at all. So what does help?
Ooh, I almost want to bring, I think you should. You go.
I was going to talk about the trauma challenge.
Oh, well, you can do
Where
that
were you
too.
going?
Yeah, kind of the same.
You go first.
Battle drill. I listened to you talk about the battle drill a couple of times, or I should say when you apply the battle drill, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But okay, so I'll give my quick spiel on the battle drill, and then you want to talk trauma challenge? Or you want me to talk trauma challenge? Because I'm technically not even in it. But so the battle drill. So when I start working with my veterans, I ask them to design a kind of movement, if you will, of behaviors. Okay. So on the battlefield, we call this a battle drill where said commander needs to move said people from point A to point B in a maneuver, right? Some sort of organized and likely rehearsed kind of movement. So if people decided that they were going to, and I would say this has to be a lifestyle, right? So you have to do this probably 3 or 4 times a day. You have to pick something to do that is very cerebral, very problem solving, and you need to do that thing pretty frequently, right? So for me, I do Rubik's Cubes, I do puzzles, you can pick a video game. Let's try not to get addicted to that. But, there's plenty of things that you can pick. And once you pick those things, breathing, oh, by the way, is fantastic. So you can still do stuff in the moment, as well as like going to the gym. You do 2 or 3 things a day like that, and that becomes your battle drill, right? So then, and I'll give you my rehearsed kind of responses. So, hey, Keith, you did just something the other second there that just got me. And I know that triggers are in me, they're not in you. So that's for me to deal with. So I'm going to just kind of bounce out of this room and go into the other room, and I'm going to twiddle my thumbs and do my Rubik's Cube. And then I'm going to come back. And if you want to chat, we can finish the chat, but I'm going to go ahead and do that. And that's something that you can tell somebody, but if Malibu Keith's not sitting right in front of me, that all of that information was for me as well. Right. And you rehearse that in any way, shape, or form that you want. And then once you're done with it and you locate that somewhere in your head where it's rehearsed, that's easy to access after a while. And it's funny because I can still tell you right now, like my son, hey, Bubba, something you said there. And he's like, oh, here he goes again.
Mine too.
Yeah. And then he'll just kind of walk off. He's like, whatever, Dad's in his own, and then,
we're going to get one.
Yeah. And then I do whatever I need to do. And then I come back and I'm like, all right, Bubba. And he's like, okay, cool, Dad. He calls it the reset button. Are we reset? Are we starting over? And that's the battle drill. Right. And that was one of the things that, Tiffany and I have discussed from time to time, but it's one of the things that I ask my veterans to do. And when they do this thing, with pretty heavy rehearsal and practice, man, it's very, very reliable.
The importance of practicing it when you aren't dysregulated, so that when you are dysregulated, it's a little bit easier to access.
And also knowing what it is that gets you to that space of dysregulation.
Yeah.
Because I know for me, there are definitely those instances where I'm like, okay, I'm leaving now and I'll be outside and, whatever it is that's going on, like I'm happy to have this conversation later. But for now, I'm gonna step away, but I have to know what it is, right? Because then I can explain it to people when they come back and they're like, you were all engaged and everything was going great. And then all of a sudden this dude pulled a knife out and you were like, I'm out. I was like, oh yeah, I got a thing.
Well, and I think this goes back to the trauma challenge, right? Because so in the trauma challenge, this is something that we do at the clinic. Veterans come in and we go through a very simple curriculum of you learn triggers, you learn coping skills, you learn emotions, you learn, really kind of how to define them and then how to define them for you. And once you are able to do that, you pull out a story, whichever story you need to, whichever story you want to. Doesn't have to be super trauma. It could be little t trauma. And then once you have that story, then you dive in with those things that we're now defining, right? Okay, I'm going to look for those things in my story. And then you sit around with a couple other veterans. And the way we do it is, a couple people will tell their story 1 week and everybody, then gives them feedback. But now they have your story. So then they reflect on their stories over and over again. They talk all of those things through in terms of the triggers and their coping skills and strategies to manage that stuff. I don't know if I missed anything, Tiffany.
What's the talk to us about the big T and little t as far as trauma goes?
Yeah, good question. So I've always referred to little t could be as little as I got to Starbucks and I had my coffee and I'm driving away and then I spilled on myself. And now I just ruined my uniform for the day, my outfit for the day, whatever that might be, as well as I don't have my coffee anymore. And if you're anybody else, you probably drink hot coffee. If you're me, you don't. It could have scolded you. but that could be a little t. Big T. Big T is one of those ones where it's an intimate moment of sad, shame, guilt. That could be a loss of a loved one. That could be, you can go anywhere from 9/11 to, I don't know what.
A bad car accident.
Well, and I think it holds a different place in your brain. Like it sits in a different space. The little T doesn't stay for as long.
Right. The big T might be one of those that your nervous system doesn't want to realign with.
Yeah.
Big T is relative. Well, I would say probably even little t, but at a smaller extent. But big T is relative simply because, we all talked about the whole what's hard, or what the stories that I was telling. What do we call this? Hardcore.
Yeah.
And to me, those aren't hardcore. When people connect, that's hardcore.
All right, so we actually have, this one's not a question. It's a statement, and first time I read it, blew my mind. I want to share it with you all now. This one comes from Lily. Shout out to Lily. Thank you for listening. We love you. Lily writes, sometimes we don't want to heal because that pain that we feel that's associated with a person or a moment or a relationship is our last connection to that thing. What's up with that?
You want me to go?
Yeah, good.
So I have several veterans that have expressed the idea that they don't want to solve some of their trauma because they don't want to forget those people they served with.
Mm.
And I would pose the question, why is it that you have to forget somebody if you process the trauma? So in other words, to process that trauma would be to recognize a healthy way of remembering this person and with clarity, as opposed to so in my mind I have this very depressing picture of my mother. Okay, she was full-blown cancer and she's standing outside of her home, and it was the last time she stood outside her home. I don't know how many times I will ever look at that picture, but I have all kinds of other pictures of my mom that she looks very healthy and having fun and everything else, right? So I would say there's an allure to trauma, and that people don't like to solve some of this trauma because of the allure of it, almost like we're romanticizing it in some way.
Well, I think it's allure to, and there's also the reality that it holds that visceral spot, right? Like it gives you that experience of, wow, this is really activating for me with this person. This reminds me of them on a visceral level, right? As opposed to, it was really great when we went and got bubblegum that one time, right? So it's gotten more activating space, right? And part of the reason that people may not want to heal that particular trauma is because of that experience, right? Because it does activate you in a different way, as opposed to, yeah, it was great when we used to go and get, ice cream on Sundays, right? It's like when someone asks you, what are 3 things that you need to work on to improve yourself? People will rattle stuff off like, I'm bad at this, I'm bad at this, I'm bad at this, right? When people are like, hey, what are 3 things that you're really good at? We're always like, I'm nice to people, and what else am I good? Like you have to think about that.
So what I hear you saying is that there's a certainty to the trauma. Is that the whatever the pain, the trauma, it's grounding in a way. It's anchoring in a way because it's so strong.
It is anchored already. Like it's anchored in your brain.
Well, I feel like it goes back to the anger part, right? Where anger sometimes fuels you. Like if this thing fuels you, you don't want to get rid of it.
Right. Right. Even though this memory may be really harsh, it's like, I remember this really awful thing that happened. It still provides you with that experience of being with that person.
And yet,
stirs you up.
And yet, it sounds like it would be in everybody's best interest to find a more healthy, less painful way to.
I don't think so. I mean, I don't think that there's a, I won't say a more healthy, less painful way, but it goes back to what we were just talking about. Like, it's okay to be in pain, right? It's okay for it to hurt. And I don't know that you necessarily want to go looking for.
Well, but the statement here is sometimes we don't want to heal. I mean, it seems to me we've got a show dedicated to the benefit of healing. Mm-hmm. That to be healed is functionally superior in that we can be our best selves for the world and for our loved ones and for ourselves if we are healed as opposed to unhealed.
So I totally agree. However, I have intense survivor's guilt. Okay. And I recently just had this conversation with veterans in the room. And I said, do you guys think I still have it? And they're like, oh no, you're good. And I'm like, then you guys clearly don't know me. Right. Cause I live with it every day. And am I healed? Abso-fucking-lutely. And do I carry it with me every day? Abso-fucking-lutely.
Wow.
Right. So the difference, and I think that's why we refer to this thing as harder than healing, right? Because that's the harder part, right? I'm healed and I'm good. I'm golden. I am very much in love with my life. And I very much have these things that honestly keep me doing exactly what I do with what I would think most people would describe, and so would I, as an intense passion to make sure I get to the people that I need to get to.
I think the other piece about it is you can hold both of those things in the same space.
100%.
Right? Like, there's a balance between the two of them, right? You can have that experience of being healed and of having done the work and still know, like, oh, that was really awful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's fantastic because I can have veterans sit with me in the room and they go away and they're like, hey man, today that was great. Right? Like that was good, man. And they walk away and they know that even though we had that great session, the next time they come back, they're still holding something, right? It might be there. It's going to be there. It's going to remind them. It's like that nagging injury that you have, but you've already climbed out of the hole. So if you've climbed out of the hole once, you can climb out of it again.
All Points North is the official sponsor of the Harder Than Healing podcast. APN offers custom mental health, trauma, and addiction treatment programs at APN Lodge in Colorado. Visit apn.com to learn more.
So one of the things that's also interesting is that we get the emails at pod@harderthanhealing.com. We have folks who post on our respective Facebook pages. People reach out to us. There are a lot of people who are trying to help other people, right? And got this email from an M. Rojo. So shout out to M. Rojo.
We love you, Rojo.
Love you. M. Rojo writes, love the show, would be grateful for some advice. And I'll read this word for word here, make sure I get it right. I have a friend I've been helping navigate some mental health troubles, marriage troubles, etc. And I thought I was doing a good job and that he was making some progress. But then I recently found out that he's also been struggling with substance abuse a lot more than he's shared with me. And now I don't know how to keep supporting him if he's not being totally honest with me.
Go.
Well, what I'm struck by there is how universal the desire is to help others and how not straight a line that is. Because just off the top, I would say, for me, what I'm hearing in this is how quickly we go to the negative. Well, this person wasn't being completely honest with me, or this person wasn't divulging the full extent of their struggles. Therefore, what was the point? Or therefore, I wasn't being as helpful as I thought I was being.
Right. I think I definitely hear the honest piece. It's difficult for me to continue to engage with this person if they're not being completely honest with me. And at the same time, we have to recognize, like, people don't come out and tell you their most gut-wrenching, traumatic experience story from go, right? Like, you don't, and at least in my experience, I mean, sometimes people do, but it's pretty rare, where someone will come
and let's keep in mind what you do for a living. Like, you do this shit for a living, and you're not expecting that from people.
No, I mean, people will come in and tell you whatever they're comfortable telling you, right? Like and you'll hear it a lot of times clinically, people will say, well, meet them where they are, right? Or, you got to go through the process with people. Like, you can't expect someone to be wherever they are if they're not there, right? And if my expectation is that you're going to be completely honest with me I want you to be honest with me from day one, but at the same time, like, I don't expect you to come in and tell me your childhood trauma story, like, in the first 15 minutes. I mean, I don't get to that question until at least a half an hour in. So I think part of it is we have to have an expectation and a recognition that realistically people are going to be as honest as they can, as long as they're in that space. And then that's our role, right? Is to provide them with that space to be as honest and authentic as they can be. And we have a lot of practice of not taking on those expectations around, I must have been doing it, or I'm not sure if I can continue to do it based on this kind of random expectation. But some of that's training, and some of that's just having been in practice for a long time. But people will be as honest as they can.
I think one of the things that comes to mind is, I wouldn't say I'm in the professional space of creating peers and mentors and that kind of stuff, although that's a lot of the work that we do. I don't want my veterans that are mentoring people, I don't want them to help anybody. I want them to support, and those two words are very distinctly different. Simply because if you're going to help somebody, you're almost implying that I'm giving them something, or I'm doing of myself to put this person in a better place.
Well, I think the help, it's the emotional help, right? Like, if you're going to help somebody, you're walking out of the grocery store and somebody can't lift a bag of cat food, then I will help you get this cat food. Right, I'm going to help you get this cat food in the back of your car. That doesn't mean I'm going to help you unpack the entirety of your trauma when you lost your cat when you were 5. Like, that's different, right? Yeah. Like, those are different things. And
you don't want to do that, right? You can't do that for them anyway, right? You can be there, and I have this. I tell this story occasionally, and I realize I had. Anyways, so this lady lost her husband and wanted to talk to a priest, and I set it up. Catholic woman. So we set it up, and she goes and she meets this priest, and they sit down, and I'm this guy who's like, counselor guy who's trying to provide space for this woman. And they go and they sit down, and because, elderly woman, so I take her there, and I'm making sure the whole thing's going to work out for her. And I sit at this park bench next to her, and the priest and her start, hanging out, if you will. And I'm listening because I really want to know what this priest is going to say, right? And Franciscan monk, actually. And I'm sitting there and I'm listening, and I'm like, got terrible hearing, so I'm also trying to like read lips, and I'm watching, and 30, 45 minutes go by. Do you think he said a word? Not a thing. And I remember thinking, like, that guy gets it, right? Because most of these people, when they're in traumatic events and they're trying to process, they don't need you to say nothing. They want you to keep your mouth shut, right? And they want to be able to go back to when their cat died when they were a kid thing, and then they can sort it out, and they get to talk to you about it. Doesn't mean you're supposed to say anything in return. Right.
It's that piece of being emotionally connected, right? Like being empathetic without necessarily having to say anything.
Yeah.
It's being present and engaged with someone in a real way, as opposed to jump into whatever random conclusion it is that we think is going to be
100%.
best, right? You should go to anger management classes.
Yeah. And I remember asking her when it was all said and done, I was like, so how was it? And she was like, oh, it was great. And I was like, what did he say? I don't recall. And I was like, because he didn't say anything. But for me, it was like, wow, that's intense. And that was when I was pretty young. So I definitely took a page out of that guy's book. And so going back to the advice for this person, I mean, if you're going to want to be there for anybody, I mean, no judgment, but you don't need to worry about their habits of coping as much as be there for them to vent, to talk, to, share that space with. I think if you do that, then they probably would stop whatever it is that they're using to cope because you're supporting them.
Well, and I think that piece of like, I can't help them unless they're completely honest. If you're operating from this space where you can't help someone unless they're completely honest, then you're in a pickle.
Yeah.
I mean, you're setting yourself up with this expectation of, unless this person is 100% honest with me, I'm not going to be able to help this person. As opposed to, I am happy to be engaged and share in this moment with you, whether that's a happy moment, whether it's suffering, sadness, whatever that is, because that fosters that place where they can be 100% honest with you. You don't just go from zero to jump, and it doesn't work like that.
Right. Well, and the idea behind that too is this judgment piece, right? So in my mind, I'm thinking like in the justice system, right? There's a lot of, so I work in the justice system occasionally. And when I do that, there's probation officers that tell me like, yeah, Bob, Fred, or Sally, they're all drinking it up. I'm like, oh, okay. And then they come into my room and say that they're not. Do you think I'm going to tell them like, hey man, you guys are all fucked because you're not telling me the truth? No, I'm going to lose that person immediately. Right. But eventually, like you said, if they're going to own who they are, eventually they're going to tell you they're doing that anyway. But if they can't get there, they can't get there. That's on, I don't want to be.
Well, it's not your role as a clinician to tell someone what they need to tell you, right? It doesn't do anyone any good, in my opinion, to be in that space where it's like, if you did this, then everything would be better, right? Like if you believed in butterflies and sunshine and, gold at the end of the rainbow, then that is what would happen, right? There's not a lot of utility in that. I mean, I think a big piece of it for me, especially in the way that I look at my clinical work, is like it's to help someone get to wherever it is that they need to go. And I'm not imposing any of my ideas on that.
Well, but I think this is where it gets tricky, right? In that what I'm gathering from this email, right, is that M. Rojo, this is a friend, all right? And if you're going to be getting in the trenches with a friend about this, let's sort of presume it's a good friend, okay? And so then we say, all right, well, what do we get from a friendship? Why do we want to help friends? Well, part of why we want to help friends, we don't want to lose them, either permanently or functionally. And so I think that sometimes when you're helping a friend or a loved one navigate, whether it's a mental health emergency or a substance abuse emergency, it can be very hard to have that clinical distance because the stakes feel high.
Right. Well, and here's what I would say is that that's not a clinical situation, right? Like the caveat is that this is my friend, right? If I call Malloy and I'm like, hey, will you help me move this really gigantic cast iron stove that I found?
When you have COVID.
Right.
That's a very specific example, Nathaniel.
Into the back of a U-Haul. Yeah, as a friend, we can do that, right? But it's not a clinical setting. And I think that there's a distinction that needs to be made around, like, I am your friend and I'm going to be your support. And I mean, granted, the two of us have conversations all the time that probably fall outside of what you would typically hear as far as a normal friend.
Nothing's normal about us, that's for sure.
It's so true. And we are operating as friends. Like, I'm not his clinician, right? Like, don't get me wrong. There are definitely moments where I'm like, Malloy, I need a moment. Really need a moment right now. And, he'll metaphorically pull me back from the ledge, as it were. And he's not my clinician, right? He's my friend. And I think as a person who wants to support someone, whether it's your your best friend, whether it's your friend that you just met, whether it's some random dude who fell while he was skateboarding and dropped all of his crayons. Like, that's your role in that moment. It's not a clinical role. It's a role as a supportive person.
That's interesting. So also there's that humility that's required to sort of be like, this is like, I love you, and because I love you, I got to pass the baton here. I feel like sometimes we gotta be ready as friends, as siblings, as spouses, to be like, I love you, and I love you so much that I know that my love is not going to get you the help that you need, because my love will stay, and you will continue to benefit from my love.
Yeah.
And my love cannot fix your addiction. My love cannot address your, any more than it can address your type 2 diabetes. I can love you, and I can love you, and you got to go see a doctor, homie.
Yep. I like that.
Word.
Plus by APN is an official sponsor of the Harder Than Healing podcast. Plus by APN treats the root causes of mental health issues with neurotechnology like deep TMS, ketamine-assisted therapy, and stellate ganglion blocks, so you can get relief from symptoms and find long-term healing. Schedule a free consultation and find your treatment match at plusapn.com. That's PLUSAPN.com.
All right, so Donald, I know that we were talking about something on the drive on the way up. And I'm wondering if that anecdote relates to this idea of what we owe a moment, what we owe a loved one. If you could speak a little bit on that.
Okay. So I have a veteran ask me recently, my wife is asking me to tell her about the military, right? About these stories. And he said, I don't want to. And it's been a point of contention for them because without this story, she feels like they are not connecting. And he was like, so what do I do? And I don't think I would ever tell somebody to lie. So instead I would say, pick a story, right? And just go with a story. But, and on the drive up, we were talking about I happen to watch a lot of Avenger movies, and we were talking about Captain America coming back from the past when he went back to put the stones in place, and all of a sudden he's sitting on this bench, and was he Falcon? Something?
Yeah, I think so.
Falcon guy walks up.
The Black Captain America.
The Black Captain America walks up and says, hey, Cap, what's going on? Blah, blah, blah. And then points out this wedding ring that he's wearing and says, so what's going on with that? And he was just like, oh, yeah. He's like, so you want to tell me about that? He's like, no, I don't think I will. And for me, and I was talking about it with Tiffany, man, it was like, for me, it was just, wow. Like the movie, like you guys got it right? There are some things that you don't share with other people.
Or some things that you get to just have for yourself.
Absolutely. And it's that space, right, where you have this moment, you have this stuff, you have these things, and you can keep them all to yourself. And I don't think that means that you can't connect with, some other people. But I guarantee there's stories that veterans tell me and other veterans that they won't tell anybody else. And more appropriately, they shouldn't. There's some of those stories that I think I told you guys this on one of the episodes previously, but I had a politician who was saying, so, hey, Malloy, let's get to it, man. Like literally say, what's your Jason Bourne story? And I was like, all right, here's where we're going to go with this. What you just asked me was to tell you about the most intimate embarrassing, shameful, amazing. You think of all the like terrific, crazy words, and you just asked me to tell you that story, right? So you, Mr. Politician, think about that time, right, when you were so scared or you were so insecure and frightened and exhausted and terrible and all kinds of things, right? And tell me that moment. And you're going to look at me like I'm already in that moment right now and it doesn't feel good and I don't want to tell you about it at all.
Right. Well, and there's also the pressure, like there's the social pressure of like, I'm supposed to answer this question.
Yeah.
Right. There's this piece where it's like, I'm supposed to provide them with an answer that, you know, tells them my Jason Bourne story. While at the same time, it goes back to that piece from before where they're like, I can't help this person unless they're being totally honest with me. And you just asked me to tell you your most intimate story.
Yep.
And I don't even know you.
Well, now hang on a second. So this is the tension that I'm feeling though, because we also spend a lot of time talking about needing to address the monster in the box, needing to make sure that that monster doesn't get hidden away. So can you just help for the listeners, and by the listeners I mean me, can you square up this idea that we don't want to block things off? We want to be whole people. But at the same time, there's some stories that we don't tell some people.
I would say that is true. I think that there are a lot of different ways that I think about going with this particular piece of it. But I do think that there are some stories that we keep to ourselves because they're our stories. And there are good stories, obviously, that we keep to ourselves that are like our intimate moments that we share with maybe another person, whether it was, you know, the birth of your child, whatever it is. There are moments that you have that are yours. The distinction is when someone comes to you and says, tell me this most intimate story that you have on your wall over here, and I want to hear it right now. It's like, well, I don't want to tell you that story.
So what I hear you talking about here is agency and control. So it's like, right, Captain America's sitting there on the bench, and that story doesn't own him. That story doesn't render him powerless. He doesn't have to keep that story locked away. It's a story that he's in full control over. And he's making the story with full agency to not share it with anybody because it's personal. Or you've got a veteran who's saying, you know what, you know, to their significant other, their girlfriend, their spouse, I don't know what the situation was exactly, but the idea of, I can promise you that this story does not have control over me, right? And part of the way I know it doesn't have control over me is that I'm going to make the choice not to tell you. I'm not going to tell. It's not because I'm incapable. It's not because this event still renders me powerless. It's because I'm making the choice not to tell it. I feel like that's a distinction that I hear you saying.
I think so. I mean, and I think in some ways it's because it's an intimate story that you get to choose whether or not you want to share. It's a part of yourself that you get to decide whether or not you want to disclose to
as
someone.
Opposed to some monster that I've locked up and I've blocked off, because in that scenario I don't have control.
Right.
I have to keep it away.
Right. It's a very distinctly different thing. And
okay.
The example that I use on this one all the time is when you go and you meet someone, and like, I'm not going to meet somebody and say, hi, my name is Bill and I'm gay. Right? Like, that's not your opener. You're not like, hi, my name is Bill. That's it. You're not going to go to like the most intimate identifying part of you. I mean, you might, and some people definitely do. And I think oftentimes when people do that, it's like, whoa, hold on. Wait, what is TMI? Too much. Like, you need to back up. Like, I don't even know you well enough. Don't tell me that story yet. Right?
Yeah. And I mean, we have a couple of veterans that like to do that. And when those veterans do that, a lot of the time in the room, it's like everybody can feel it, right? It's like, okay, nope, we didn't ask for that, first of all. So there's that piece. But I also think that every story, if we're going to say that this is going to be like a therapeutic experience, right, then it has to be met with empathy and understanding. If you know that you're in that population and you want to share it, then share away. Right. But a lot of veterans go into a situation, they're like, ooh, let me shed some light on this. I can shed some light on this. And all of a sudden they're, under scrutiny or whatever it might be. You're not sharing your story in the right place, right? And I think that's the part of this that becomes really important, because if this person's going to say, hi, I'm Bob and I'm gay, well, I sure as hell hope you're in a population that's going to be accepting of that.
Yeah, receptive for sure.
Right. Because as soon as you're not, that becomes an issue.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be an issue, but if you're not with the right population, now you're...
Well, but hang on a second, because I guess what I wonder then is, and we're deep waters.
Sure.
Obviously, everything we do is deep waters. I think when I think about the veteran who's coming in and oversharing quickly, right? I wonder if the veteran's response is, well, fucking, I'm here for me. Why do I have to be worried about other people's feelings? I'm here to get stuff off my chest. I'm here to own it. Oh, you all have to get on my level. What about
that doesn't connect people?
No. And as a matter of fact, that person gets feedback that, we're hearing your story and nobody's connected. And while we're not connected, you're not getting anywhere with this. As a matter of fact, so here's how it played out in the trauma challenge.
Okay.
So he starts to tell his story, and there are two people that started to give him feedback. And then one of them was like, look, man, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not connecting with any of it. Why don't you do me a favor? Can you please tell me about, and then it was a person's name. And that veteran was like, couldn't do anything. Started to well up a little bit, got up, started to walk out of the room, stopped at the door, came back in, sat down, and said, no, not right now. And I'm sitting across the table from him, and I said, you know what? That was the most connected I've ever felt with you.
Right.
And he didn't say a word.
And I think a piece of that, right, it goes back to what you were just talking about, which is the priest, the Franciscan monk.
100%.
Right. And I think it also bears note that oftentimes those stories that are off-putting or that, people will tell sometimes serve as defense, because there's an opportunity for you to be able to walk into a room and take on the whole room with this story that is going to be activating whatever. I mean, insert appropriate thing here. And you have control of that story. You have control of how much of that story you're going to tell. You have, for the most part, an idea of how people are going to respond to you, how they're going to respond to that story. So it puts you in a position where you can stay safe by telling something that's got a predictable outcome for you, right? You know where this is going to go more or less.
By being over, you talk about this is the over aggressive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like posturing, right? If somebody comes in and they have this story that's going to put you on your heels, you've just controlled the room with your story. It's a way to posture. And oh, by the way, if you have any kind of trauma or bullied or any one of those things, and you walk into the room and you want to be the guy who everybody is frightened of, man, you start off with a story where everybody should be scared of you. It's a great way of doing it.
Right. And then when you have that random person who's like, that's interesting. And then the response is like, that's not the response I was expecting. Like, you were supposed to be more like, impressed by that. I'm like, that was a good story.
Yeah. Maybe somewhat impressive, but mostly just hiding.
I want to go to a couple more letters that we got and see if this last one in particular can sort of tie things all together. But the first one, the first to the last that I want to bring in, this is like going way back. There's a little town called Ashburnham, Massachusetts. My folks were renting an apartment on this farm up by the New Hampshire border of Massachusetts when I was born. We would go back up into this is, northern Massachusetts 3, 4, 5 times a year. And the town over, it just so happened, is where settled a dear friend of my old man growing up. Jerry Manny. Shout out Jerry Manny. who's an incredible clinician in his own right, has healed a lot of people. So Jerry writes, and this is again, it's not a question, but it's a great jumping off point for a conversation. Jerry writes, good treatment begins with good assessment. And I think about how many times we try to support or try to heal loved ones, and we're doing so because we're not clinicians, because we're, I don't know, playwrights, coming from a place of not being clinical. And so therefore we sort of skip the assessment part altogether, and we just hear something that sounds like something, and it's like, ooh, I'm going to throw a lot of love and Wikipedia entries at this. But can you all, I saw everybody in the room sort of give their own nod. Good treatment begins with good assessment. Yes, that's a 3-course meal right there. How about we get into it?
You want to go?
I think that assessment is incredibly useful. I also think that it serves as a baseline, right? I think you have to use the information that you get from an assessment, I mean, obviously in the most appropriate way. However, having said that, good treatment does not necessarily need to start with a hard and fast, like, let's sit down and do a Rorschach. You know, I mean, I think that there's a level of empathy and connection that you can get with it within clinical work where there's never been an assessment done. I mean, when I went into grad school, I decided, well, I'm going to be a clinician and doing this therapy thing. I should probably be in therapy, right? And so I went and, found myself a therapist, and she was wonderful. We worked together for years. At no point did we ever have like a formal sit-down assessment. So I think that there are certainly parameters where assessment can be super useful. In my lane of the world, whether it's ADHD or learning disabilities, like the psychoeducational assessment, super useful for providing very specific information that it is very specifically testing for. So I think we have to be careful with the idea that assessment in and of itself sets you up for good clinical treatment. And there's also the caveat that sometimes people are wonderful at doing assessments and then they are not wonderful at working with other humans.
I would say along the same lines, I 100% agree. Along the same lines, I think that assessments can be used to help clinicians that maybe don't understand why something is happening. And I say that in large part for myself because I jump to what I think is going on. And when I go there, if I can recognize my own biases, then I will continue to use an assessment. And it's simply because, as a matter of practice, I know that I can be wrong and that I should depend on assessments to steer me in the right direction. Now, if I feel like this person is struggling and I thought I had it, I need to go to an assessment. I need to find out if I didn't have it and why are they really struggling. Now, if I connect with this person, and I don't know where the research stands on this. I'm pretty sure the research says that nowadays, most therapists look more like the therapy they're doing and not the theory that they're practicing, if that makes sense. So what's behind that is every good clinician will do that connection, will do that human being piece that the assessment, it might get you there, but you really have a lot of work to do past the assessment. So the assessment, I think, is as valuable as the clinician is willing to use it or in what capacity they're going to use it. Mm-hmm. And I like to think that where the assessments really help is when people are first learning their clinical tools, right? They're first learning their clinical, where they are and how they're going to be as a clinician. so that they can understand the assessments and say, okay, so I thought it was this and now it's this, and now I know what it really looks like because I use this assessment. I have a better understanding.
I also think it could be a useful tool along the way, and to not necessarily limit the assessment piece to the initial assessment. I mean, I think everybody
that's
does,
interesting.
I think everyone does an initial intake, and whatever flavor that looks like for you, clinically, it's going to be different for everyone. I mean, so everyone's got their kind of opening spiel. And at some point you go and you have that human connection, and if you're just lost, I mean, just speaking for myself personally, those are the moments where I'm like, man, I really need to see that I need help. Like I am lost.
Does someone's assessment, does someone's capacity to complete an accurate assessment, does that change and evolve as therapy or treatment goes on?
It depends on what you're assessing.
I would say the best therapists are always assessing, right? Like, sure, there's an important piece to doing an intake, especially if you're working in a really structured mental health setting. But you're constantly assessing. And a really good therapist, to your point, probably the best therapist I've ever had, we didn't do an intake. There was no assessment at the beginning. We just connected as people, and she assessed as we went on and got to know me. But that's because she had been working for 20, 30 years in the mental health setting, had done all the assessments, and she's just in a constant state of that.
Very cool. Very cool. All right, we've got two we're going to wrap up with.
I want to go back to one thing though.
Yeah,
on
please.
that previous question.
Please.
I think when people that don't have a clinical background are trying to do assessment and or helping out their person, I think they're potentially could be doing a huge disservice to themselves and the other person. Because like we were saying before, right, hey, we're friends, but we're not sitting here as counselor to client. So that person, although they might be trying to sleuth it out, which there's nothing wrong with that, but I would say be very careful with that, right? Because what happens in return, and this is very heavy in the veteran space is why I'm bringing it up, if you're going to help somebody and you're trying to use these clinical tools that you don't necessarily have, and that person goes south, all of it's on your shoulders. Whether you want to believe it or not, you're going to feel super guilty. Why was I doing that? I should have gotten them to a different place. And instead now I tried to burden this, and now this person is gone. That's a lot of weight to carry. So
Right.
I would say, going back to your point, sometimes there's these conversations need to be managed by a licensed clinician, simply because you don't want that weight.
Right on.
That's all I wanted.
No, it's very smart, man. All right, so we've got these last two here. The first one is from Erin, and she writes, and I love. See, some of these were very direct, right? So like Jerry Manny's was like a fastball down the middle. This one's like a knuckleball. This one's like a wiffle ball.
I
This
don't want
thing's
this one.
This
You got
thing's
this
all
one.
no. Listen, this
I don't hit
one's
knuckleballs.
you got this. She writes, it's important for people to laugh. We learn how to laugh we learn how to laugh to keep from crying. All right. But when it comes to some heavy traumatic topics, we sometimes hear so many jokes or dismissive comments that it can feel difficult to feel safety. So we all need to laugh, but no one wants to be the joke.
You want to go?
I don't know where to go.
So I'll go with my first instinct, and that's I think if you've done your work, you don't mind the joke. If you've done the work, if you haven't done the work, you don't want to be that joke. And I really truly believe that people like Robin Williams, right, this highly talented entertainer, there were clearly different perspectives that he carried. And I would say that if you're in a place where you being the joke is going to be painful, yeah, you don't want to be that person. But I think there's plenty of people that when you do the work that humor's fine, if that makes sense. Because I immediately, as soon as you said it, the one thing that resonated with me immediately was like, I don't mind being the joke. And I don't think there's any insecurity with that. I just don't mind. Whereas I do know if I see somebody else making themselves a joke because they know that it's palatable for everybody else, I immediately want to, I don't know, protect them maybe as
Right, intervene.
in some way.
Well, that's interesting because I can definitely think about, just reflecting on myself, there are most things are fodder for humor that I'm very comfortable with. And then I have a handful of things that are definitely not healed in me. And I say, yeah, don't fuck with that.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm not ready for those jokes.
Right, because that's not funny to me.
Right.
Well, and I think that's to go to that point of like nobody wants to be the joke. I think there is a space where you have the ability and the opportunity to be able to say like, no, that's not funny to me, right? And even if that's not necessarily your style or it's not something that you're comfortable with, whether that's you recognizing it's a trigger and walking out of a room, or with that level of insight, right? Like everyone wants to laugh and we want to laugh to heal. However, nobody wants to be the butt of the joke. Yes, that is true. And if you're in that space where you're like, hey, I know a joke about a black guy, I'm gonna be like, yeah, that's not gonna be funny, right? Like, and I'm comfortable saying that. And I mean, whoever's gonna hear it's gonna hear it however they want to. And for me, you have a space to be able to say, I'm not okay with that, right? Like that joke is not funny to me. Like if you're gonna do some sort of random toxic masculinity, whatever, insert.
See, you know what's interesting is that like I have a friend of mine who was an administrator with me. He was my boss at a school. I have a tremendous amount of love for this guy. Great educator, visionary, excellent leadership. He once told me he can't enjoy stand-up comedy, period. And to me, I thought like, man, and he said, he was like, because I find it there's too much there that that's hit me the wrong way.
Yeah, for sure.
And I thought like, what a shame. I love stand-up comedy and I love, I'd say 80% of it. There's definitely some stuff where I'm like, man, you're punching down. Don't punch down. Come on, dude. And it's usually a dude who's doing the down punching. But I do wonder then, like, if you're in a place, so I guess this is what I'm curious about, right? If you're in a place where like, man, I can't laugh at that, right? Does that make you right? Or does that make you just, hey, leave the room so we can all laugh at this?
I don't put a judgment on it one way or the other. I mean, it doesn't make me right, or it doesn't, me leaving the room doesn't make it right. But what I do think is that it's my level of awareness, right? Like I'm not going to put a judgment on it, whether it's right or it's wrong. For me, it's a matter of like, I understand that this is going to be offensive to me. So you guys can certainly, I'll leave and you can tell the joke if you want to. That's totally fine. And at the same time, I recognize that I'm going to be offended by this. And I'm okay with that.
Well, there's a piece of it for me too that's like, okay, so you're telling this, and for me, it's not just like the self-awareness of what it's going to feel like for me, but I also think to myself quickly about, so you need to say this? Right?
Out loud?
Like you're the person who's saying these things. Why do you need to say them? Oh, okay, because you're that person. Got it. Right. Now that doesn't really translate with stand-up, but
I think the stand-up thing is really interesting though, because comedy does hold, especially stand-up comedy, does hold a very nuanced space where it goes back to some of what this person was saying. Like we want to laugh, and we want to laugh to be able to heal, and we want to have those experiences. Comedy puts it wraps it up into a nice, neat package, right? It's like one of those hard candies that you can just open up and you can digest it right then, and then it's done. But it was funny, so you could hold it, right? So I think that part of the space that I've always thought was super interesting about comedy in and of itself is that people will say things, comedians will say things that you just cannot say. in day-to-day life.
SNL has a great job doing that.
Right. And it's a way to convey something that's oftentimes really difficult for people to hear. So it occupies, I think, this very distinct
and
place.
there's also a communal aspect to it that is inescapable, right? Because you're in a room and everything that's being said is being litmus tested by the rest of the room. And so my suspicion, Nathaniel, is that part of what would be, right, you're walking through day to day as a black man. That is.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's right. One of the many, many things that's true about you. You mentioned that there are going to be times when, hey, I got a great black guy joke.
Right.
And you say, well, I will see myself out. And I imagine that part of it is not only do I want to hear whatever dumb shit's about to come out of your face, but I don't want to see the reaction of the other people in the room because that's going to make me feel some kind of way. Like, I guess that there's the communal aspect of it, right?
Well, for me, it's funny because like I probably wouldn't even say anything. If somebody said something like that, I probably would just look at them like they were insane and just like,
that's about all you got.
that's all. Yeah, that's probably all that would come out for me. And I think, I don't know if my general energy push that direction would make you not tell that joke, but I think it probably would make you not tell
Well,
that
let's
joke.
test this, Nathaniel. I have several jokes that I've been wanting to.
So I think that it's being able to, I mean, whether it's read the room or you know, somebody's uncomfortable or they're like, this was really great. My racist grandfather used to tell this joke and people loved it. I'm like, well, okay, we should, let's hear what your racist grandfather's joke is, right? And sure, like you could be snarky about it, but at the same time, like there's a level of expectation around, like I'm gonna say something, and it doesn't have to be a random black guy joke. You'd be like, I got a really good gay joke, and be like, yeah, I really probably don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
Well, but it also, I mean, this comes down to the art of it, right? I mean, obviously, we could talk about this subject forever.
Yeah.
But the part of the question is, can you write and execute your joke well enough that we can have the cathartic healing experience of, wow, you bundled up that hard candy. You empowered me to process some shit through humor in a way that was really actually palatable and wise versus your hard candy is cruelty. Your hard candy is demeaning, right? And I think that's a lot of the success or failure of that laughter is the laughter in service of healing, wisdom, and understanding, or is the laughter in service of posturing?
Yeah.
Is it the same as coming in the room and kicking in the door and I'm going to tell this story. Oh, back up. I'm in control.
I think oftentimes it can also be in service of just getting people to think. You know, I mean, I don't know that there's necessarily an answer.
Listen, yeah, but that to me, that's the definition of wisdom. If you can say some shit that makes people think.
I think when it comes to the humor piece of the puzzle, and there's people getting triggered or feeling triggered because in some way, shape, or form they feel unsafe. So now all of a sudden they feel like they need to protect themselves. So their boundaries are like black and white, as opposed to someone who's worked on their shit. They can still not be happy about an unpleasant joke, but they don't get triggered. They just have their own personal boundary about it. And they handle it internally versus externalizing it on everyone. And like, how dare you tell that joke? Right. It's triggering.
Yeah, and the recognition of like, oh, that's me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Aaron, thank you for coming through with that question. That was excellent.
That was fun.
All right. Last one. And this is, so we got a couple of these, but my old buddy Joe Lewis was the one who was most direct about it. Joe Lewis would like to be a guest on our podcast.
Okay, Joe.
And
I'm not sold, Joe. I'm not sold.
Say it ain't so, Joe.
All right. I'm going to see if I can sell. So the last time I saw Joe in person, he was planning a trip. He was going to hitchhike from New Mexico to Rio.
Oh, Jesus. Don't start in New Mexico, please. Okay.
You might not get out.
Wait a minute. So you heard hitchhike from blank to Rio, and your answer was don't let it be New Mexico.
Don't start in New Mexico.
Okay.
Well, and let's also bear in mind,
I'm from New Mexico.
Oh, fine. Well, you guys all have a lot to talk about. I'm sure you know a lot of the same people.
I'll give you a ride.
Perfect. So Joe is an adventurer. Joe is he's an anthropologist.
that's
And
fun.
so he actually is really interested in mental health through an anthropological lens. And
That's interesting.
the way different cultures and wisdom traditions have handled mental health and neurodiversity. So with that, Joe says that he said, listening to the show, he says that the green beret in my head is the one that my clinicians have been trying to get me to mellow out for years. So he loves the dynamic of you guys next to each other on the couch. And he writes, wisdom traditions say that powerlessness, so recognizing the illusion of reality and control, is honest and not the same as helplessness.
You're gonna have to read that again.
Absolutely. I'm going to simplify it down.
No, just
I've been
just read it
sitting this. All right, here we go. Wisdom traditions say powerlessness. So this is the illusion of reality and control and letting that go is honest, and powerlessness is not the same as helplessness. And surrender is not submission.
I would say I agree. And now I like you. You can hitchhike through New Mexico.
There you go. I was going to say, it sounds like Joe is from New Mexico. That whole correspondence is a very New Mexico correspondence for me.
Okay. Then I'll let him. I like it.
Good.
Mhm. I think that the distinction is control. When I think of that last piece where you talk about submission,
Surrender is not submission.
surrender is not submission. And I think that you're in two distinctly different places. If you surrender, then you have surrendered. If you are submitting to someone, you don't have any agency in that. And Milo and I have a story of one of our buddies. At one point, we were horsing around, I guess.
Yeah. Horsing around. Can say that.
I want to get him just not so bad. I can't even tell you. Just want to come right out of his nose.
You want me to tell it?
No.
You got it.
Okay. So, he's a bigger guy. It's like, I don't know, 250, 2 something, whatever. Larger than I am. And he's
Big as a horse.
he's
I mean, I'm 6'1", 215, and I think he's about 6'2", 230.
something. Big guy. He's like,
Just three dudes horsing around.
oh yeah, we're just jagging around. I mean, this is us. We're like, hey, let's go do whatever. It's like, I got to, take it downstairs, and I'm going to make you submit.
Just three little ponies.
And I was like, okay. So the three little ponies get to that spot, and I was in a spot where I was like, this is really uncomfortable for me, and I feel like I want to break your arm right now. I didn't say that. I looked up at Donald, and he just went.
Don't do it.
He just shook his head, and I was like, I surrender.
So the backstory to that, because there's a little bit more to it than that. This person was, because they're bigger, and this goes with some of the toxic masculinity maybe, was like, I'm going to impose myself on you. And at one point, I pointed out to him that doesn't work with some people, right? Like you just you can't get away with just being bigger and potentially stronger. The other person, if they have a brain and they know how to use things, they can counter those things. And so
You're being real vague, and it's freaking me out.
in a wrestling kind of, okay, so let's go to some jujitsu kind of stuff.
Okay.
Right? If you're doing jujitsu and you are in a
Trained.
place where you have to use strength and the other person can outwit you, you will find that strength does you no purpose. Does that make sense? You can very much outthink somebody if you're that clever that pain or...
Now, hang on a second. Hang on a second.
I'm gonna break it down real simple for you.
Please.
This 250-pound man is sitting on top of me, and he's like,
Yes.
I could beat you up right now.
Yep.
And I'm like, I'm in a position right now where I have your wrist exactly where I want it, and if I move a little bit to the right, I'm gonna snap that joker in half. Should I do that?
And I said,
Don't do that.
don't do it.
And I have a background in training, so like part of the reason that this particular human was like, I am bigger and I am stronger, and he was like, I will squish you, and I was like, squish away, man. Like I'm not concerned about that, but I will.
I'm going to pop your head off. It's kind of like one of those things where you're like, I got you in a headlock. I'm going to pop your head off. It's like, well, only if you can hold on.
Right?
So
I'm gonna step on your toe. You're gonna let me go.
there you go. So that's the backstory. But I didn't tell that very well.
So if it had been a submission, he would have forced you to be like, uncle, like, you know, right. You decided, even though you could have broken his wrist or given him a thumb in the
There were lots of
ear,
options.
Yeah, there were.
you decided I will surrender to diffuse the situation.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, there was no utility in it for me. Like,
Okay.
what's the point? Like, I'm not.
All right, so I think that surrender is not submission is an easy one to get your head around. There's agency there, right? I'm going to choose to surrender myself to this experience. I'm going to choose to surrender to this moment, these emotions, whatever it may be. Tell me about powerlessness is not the same as helplessness.
This goes to the parable of the guy with the wagon.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know. It's true. I mean, there's, you know, like, so when we were talking, Nathaniel and I have these stories, and I always comment about how I want to work harder, and so long as I'm working, then things continue to happen, right? And so I have that ability, and now I'm even losing my train of thought. What did he say again?
Powerlessness is not the same as helplessness.
And so in the back of my mind, I have this as so long as I'm constantly pushing forward, I will things will happen, right? So that's to say, like, you know, Tiffany are running this clinic, right? And we want more and more mental health stuff for everybody. Now, we're not there yet, and it's very difficult to continue to get there. We're not helpless, right? But at the same time, we still can't get there. So we have to keep on using whatever we have to push forward, to keep on going. So that powerless, right, is not the same as
Helplessness.
yeah, we're powerless in some places, but we're sure as hell not helpless. We don't have the power to do some things, but that doesn't make it so that we can't do them.
I would say we're trusting the process
100%.
and we're looking at the big picture. Like in this very moment, I might feel, or this very situation, I might feel a little powerlessness. But in the bigger story, the long term, that piece was needed in order to get to the next step of the process.
I think for me, the piece that jumps up for me is like they seem like concepts that are based in different realities. Like one to me is more of an individual, and this was just probably because of the story, the surrender versus the submission piece. And whereas I think of powerlessness versus helplessness, I think of I was just talking to a friend of mine about this the other day, that the bury my heart at wounded knee, right? Like I think of like there's a distinction between being powerless because you literally have no agency. No matter what you do, you're powerless to this particular larger institution, versus the surrender and submission piece is more, seems smaller scale to me. I don't know if that makes sense.
So, well, yeah. And I mean, I think this is funny because I mean, it's so circular, right? In a lot of this stuff, but I think about, if anybody's familiar with Viktor Frankl, and so he wrote a book, Man's Search for Meaning. If you guys haven't read it, need to. It's fantastic work. But he's a guy in a concentration camp, right? Mm-hmm. A physician in a concentration camp, literally looking over a fence to see his family also, being murdered. And while he's talking through this experience, he's very much talking through this idea of like, I'm in this place of absolute and utter, they're controlling me and I can't do anything else about it. However, I'm going to own these pieces that I can own, right? And I can search for meaning in that space, right? And I got to tell you, it was just like, I read that book sometimes and think like, well, because I've read it more than once, but like it's the kind of story in my head that makes me feel like trusting the process, right? Like I can still smile and I can still be genuine and nice in those things in my self-concept. I can own who I am, and that's going to be good enough, right? And that's that there's power in that. You will, I think anybody who knows me knows that I would never, ever be considered helpless. Like there's just no way you're going to get me there. Right? I think there's a movie out there, Broken, I think is what it's called, or something to that effect, where anyways, a guy, same thing, right? I think a prisoner of war and
Unbroken. The
Unbroken. There you go.
Picture, yeah.
And so it goes back to that, right? Like you can give up, you can surrender, right? Or you can keep a power. I don't care what power it is, and you are no longer helpless, right? Whatever it might be. And so for me, I think that's
so
huge.
maybe when you talk about scales too, maybe powerlessness is acknowledging that we exist in this much larger narrative. This idea that we're powerless relative to our mortality, relative to the finite nature of what effect we can change. We're powerless to being born into a timeline and existing in the middle of said timeline, however we want to. So all of those things are things that we don't have power over, but we can choose to have agency. And in those, every time we do choose to have agency, that's the victory. And so you like the book that I come back to again and again is the myth of Sisyphus, which I must have talked about.
You got to put a writing list together for everybody.
Ooh, a reading list. Oh, how about that? A Harder Than Healing reading list. That's a dope idea. Here's the very basic idea behind the myth of Sisyphus is, you think of Sisyphus down in hell pushing the boulder up the mountain. The boulder gets to the top of the mountain. The boulder rolls down to the other side. He's like, I got to go push the thing up. And that's his punishment for all eternity. And the traditional depiction of Sisyphus is that he's weeping. He's weeping. He has sinned. He has committed this sin against the Greek gods. And now this is his punishment. And he is weeping sorrowfully that this is his lot for all eternity. And it's this great metaphor for human existence. No matter what we do, we push the boulder up, it's going to roll down, we got to push the thing again. And what Camus says is, I don't picture Sisyphus crying. I picture him smiling defiantly.
Oh yeah, probably.
And putting his shoulder into the boulder and saying, yeah, I know this is all I got. I know this is it. I'm going to push this boulder one more time than you ever thought I could, because this is my thing. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to be here. And while I don't have total agency, I do have agency about the mindset, and I do have agency about how I'm going to treat this moment right now. And I'll treat the moment down the road how I treat that moment.
So there's this chapter. I don't know if you remember this one, but wrote this chapter, and I talk about. So I was in Ranger School, and Ranger School is not supposed to be as long as I was there, and 62 days versus 147. That number will never escape me. And
it's of course because Malloy is very comfortable with failure. And he understands that he fails all the time.
Yeah. And so I'm sitting in this space, and I think, did I talk to you while I was in?
Yeah. Yes.
And I remember this conversation.
It was after you broke your ankle.
Oh no, that's the Q course. Nope. So in Ranger School, and I think I wasn't able to talk to a whole lot of people. From what I can remember, it was just like phone calls to family. Anyways, I was talking to my mom at one point, and she was saying like, you know, are you good? And I was just like, I'm defeated. And she was like, no, you're not. And I was like, no, I'm pretty freaking defeated. Like I just got recycled in mountains, finally went through mountains again. And then I got recycled in Florida. And again, 147 days, because I spent a long time in mountain phase going, waiting on recycle. And so when I'm telling her this story, and she's just like, you're going to be fine. And I was like, how do you know? Right? You don't know. And she's like, well, no, I know you're going to be fine. And it almost, I go back to Avengers now. It's like when the guy's sitting on the ground, I can't remember what his name is, and Loki's screwing with him, and he's got the gun, you know, and he's like,
said your people, someone has always oppressed other people, and no one's stood up for them.
no, the other one, what's the guy? Paul, I think is his name. He's on the ground. Loki just stabbed him. He's on the ground, and he's just, you're not going to win. Right? And he's just like, do the math. These people are screwed. These people are screwed. Like, I'm going to win. And he said, you lack the conviction. Right. And then he shot him with, oh, that's what it can do. Anyways. So the whole lack,
I got you.
Lack the conviction part. And my mom was like, no, you're going to be fine. And I remember thinking like, how can you trust that? And when she kept on saying it at some point, and I remember I'm sitting there and I look up and I see, you know, some of these other guys, and they're in training. They're not in Ranger School, but they're in training. And I remember thinking, she told me like, you find one of these guys out there, right? That's not smack dab in the middle of training. And you find one of those guys and you look at him and you look at a guy that isn't defeated, right? You look at a guy who's on top of his game. You look at a guy where if you look at that guy and you say to yourself, like, I want to be that guy because he's a badass and he's going through some really fucking hard times, but he's a badass. And know that you have no idea where he just came from. Mm. And I was like, okay, what the hell does all that mean? And then I got there and it registered for me. And I was like, okay. So even while I'm crawling through the mud, right? Even when I'm getting recycled, in my head, it's defeat. But if I just keep on pretending like this shit is just a part of this process, then I'm not defeated in any single way, shape, or form. I can keep a fucking smile on my face and be like, you want me to go up the mountain again? Let's do it. Keep up. And then go and do it again. Mm-hmm. And so it is that piece, right? Of just saying like, yeah, I'm going to put my shoulder behind this fucking boulder and stay out of my way. You know, I'm getting it up the hill.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times we end up in that space where we're not able to learn whatever lesson because it does feel defeating, right? Or it's overwhelming, or, you know, whatever mistake, it's traumatic, or whatever mistake you just made is like, and the hugest mistake in your life. And in that moment,
that's what it feels like.
Really.
And if you say I'm defeated and then you continue to be defeated, you get to be right.
Oh, yeah. You lose the process there, right?
Right. But what I'm saying is the appeal of being right, the appeal of being accurate.
Right. Yeah. It's like, see, I told you I sucked.
Exactly.
And it's so crazy because there was this one guy, I remember, he said it as soon as I got to, so when you were talking about in the Q course, I blew out my ankle in something called SUT, and small unit tactics. And so blew out my ankle, and I'm sitting, you know, ankles all wrapped up and everything else. And you have to stay accountable. So you go and you show up to this battalion of like literally just injured people. And I remember one guy, he says, yeah, you're never going to make it out of here. I was like, excuse me? He's like, yeah, you're never going to make it out of here. I think I'm going to go and do this thing instead of special forces now. And I was like, why? He's like, this is where we go, man. Like, you know, you get injured, then this is where you go, and you lose your window. And I was like, you believe that shit? And he was like, yeah, I'm going to go somewhere different now. And I was like, fuck you. I'll see you in a couple months. I'll be back in the Q course then. And he's like, no, you won't. And I remember thinking like, I'm going to do everything I can to prove you wrong, because there's just no goddamn way I'm just going to let this all of a sudden be like somebody proved me wrong. You know, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't resonate. it is that idea of like, yeah, you can, sure, that we don't have to make this process any harder. This is just who I am. No, I don't buy it.
Well, it's that piece of like failure is not an option. Well, actually it is. And I just did that epically.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to go and do it again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
I didn't like that very much. But that's the ownership there that I had to accept. But yeah, for sure.
there you go. I mean, accept and move through it, man.
Sure. Process.
So we got to say thank you again to everybody who wrote in, who called in. It's been a great episode. We're winding down an amazing first season. Any closing thoughts before we wrap up episode 9 and we got episode 10 right around the corner?
Just thank you to everybody who's come and participated and been a part of this process, and had the faith to plop the three of us on couches and chairs and talk to them. Thanks to Mr. Malibu Keith. Shout out to the Malibu on the 1MC, Tiffany on the 1MC. I think it's been a great experience. I've learned a lot. It's been really interesting, and not in a bad way. As much as like I still need another 10 episodes to digest the last 10 episodes, and then I'll be able to probably put together some sort of a coherent thought. But I think it's been fun.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing. I mean, it's been a interesting process. I had wanted to do a podcast for about 2 years.
If
I
not
think.
longer.
Yeah.
I think longer than that for sure.
And I have been, looking for the right space and people and time, and it's magically all come together. So I thank everybody for everything that they have done to make that happen. I just can't say enough about how excited I am for people to, be a part of this. So
I think thanks to you too, Jason. I mean, this has been, we talk about it throughout the podcast. Like Malloy and I have these conversations. Call them the shed conversations, or in the garage or whatever. And it's not something that I really thought of as an interesting topic. I mean, because we talk about it all the time. It's like these are not things that I can't say that I find particularly engaged. Like I'm really engaged in the things that we have conversation about. I just didn't have the same experience around like, oh, that would be interesting to share with
a broader population.
Right.
Yeah.
So thanks for that piece of it, because that's definitely been eye-opening for me, I think.
Yeah. I had a gentleman tell me that through listening to some of these things and in group and those kinds of things, that he's able to write his story better, right? Because his therapy is actually listening to this as opposed to going and seeing a therapist, because there's some things that are intimidating, and it's gotten him closer to being able to, I guess a clinical term would be self-actualized, but to get closer to that place where he feels like more like himself. And then maybe he can access, some sort of mental health resources. But I think it's just important to note I like to tell Tiffany and Nathaniel that we become the process, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we are the people that help you, figure out what your process is. And I think this podcast has been extremely valuable for me in my own process. So yeah. And you pulling us the questions, or pulling the answers out of us is it's pretty fantastic. So
Thank you, fellas.
Absolutely.
This has been incredibly meaningful for me. And I guess I just want to close by saying, really encourage everyone out there to think of this as your show. We're here working through it right along with you. We're grateful for you. We love you. And like we always say, you are worth the healing. Until next time, take care.
Hi, my name is Watika Lean, and I'm the CEO of Warrior Now. And I want to thank you for listening to Harder Than Healing, produced in partnership with All Points North and Warrior Now. This podcast is recorded on the APN campus in Edwards, Colorado. Warrior Now is a nonprofit organization that provides veterans a whole health approach through peer-to-peer services. For more information, you can contact us at info@warriornow.org or pod@heartedandhealing.com. You can also find us on all social media platforms at Warrior Now. Like, share, or subscribe for new episodes. Thank you.